Hi, welcome to another episode of Old House DIY. Today we're going to tackle this wall and this back wall. We've got a damp problem here, so we're going to be taking the plaster off, and replastering this wall with lime, and we'll see some of the reasons for why we've got this problem and why lime plaster will help solve that problem. On this back wall we can already see gypsum plaster which is starting to fail, and if we tap we can hear it's not attached. This is another typical sign where we've got damp, where we've got the paint flaking off, and this is where salts are working through, and again we've got the hollow sound. The problem here is ground level is actually about here, as we can see through this little window. This is always going to be a problem on a house of this age, and the only way to deal with it is to do it the same way as it was done originally when it was built, is with lime, which allow everything to breathe and the moisture to pass through without causing any damage. A lot of these walls back in the 80s had a chemical injected damp proofing where the lower metre of the plaster, the original lime plaster, was hacked off. A series of holes were drilled and chemicals were injected. A black bitumen tanking was applied, and then gypsum skim over the top. So I suspect when we take all this plaster off, down here we'll see a series of holes and some horrible black bitumen paint. So let's get this plaster off, and we'll have a look, see what we can find. There used to be a radiator here. We've already removed that, and we've put it blanked off the plumbing. So the next thing to do is to determine the height of our cut, because we're not going to, this is original lime plaster and is still sound, so we're leaving that. So we're just going to take the bottom off where they tried to treat the damp badly before. Dado rail runs about here, so we'll mark this level out with a laser level, and then we'll start cutting. "32 inches. There we go. Now let's get the grinder and start cutting. PPE on and make some dust. Here we can see a layer of the black bituminous paint that was applied as part of the damp proofing and tanking system. As you can see, the plaster just falls off. So we've got most of the gypsum and plaster and other nastiness off the walls. This is a prime example of why we don't. This doesn't allow the wall to breathe. This was a piece of wood once upon a time. Now it's just completely rotted out. It's not the only one. There's one there, and there was formerly one here, but that's why we let the, if the wall could breathe, that wood wouldn't have rotted out. Okay, so we've got to do something about this stuff. There's no way we can put this back, but thankfully we've got a stash of original stone that was lying in next door's garden, which we've been able to purloin. Thank you very much. So we've got to cut and fit this. I've been fiddling for a while. I've already cut the top and the back of this one, and this one will fit nicely into here. So we've got our new stones all all bedded in. I've filled in the worst of the cracks. It's a process known as dubbing out. After this is set up, we'll then start with our plaster, which will be scratch coat, second coat, and then finish coat. But I think we've restored the strength back in this corner, and we won't have any more problem with damp once we've got the lime plaster as opposed to the gypsum. So there's the end wall, most of it removed, a little bit more tidying up. a good vacuum and then some pointing. And then the internal walls where we had the plaster coming off over here, that will get just lime plastered. Now just starting to rake out the joints, get them ready for repointing. In the best YouTube tradition, a software error, i.e. me forgetting to press the record button. So I'm just cleaning out the joints, raking them out, give them a good vacuum, then a good wet down with some water in preparation for pointing. So we get a nice uniform level layer on the pointing hawk, hold it against the joint, and then using the pointing iron we just scoop it off and pack it into the joint, working our way along. And if needs be, we can go back with a different pointing iron and just tidy it up, make sure it's in there, knock off any loose bits. So we've got it all pointed back. Now time to give it a good beating with the churn brush. This has, one, it tidies it up, but two, more importantly, it consolidates the mortar back into the joints because it can be prone to cracking. So give it a good beating, not particularly too much brushing, otherwise you'll brush the mortar out, although that can be useful for cleaning up. It's mainly just beating it in. Right, on to the next stage with the plastering now. So first we're going to brush it down with a stiff churn brush and then water it, wet it down to control the suction again. Top tip, on the floor you see I've got some Proplex. It's like black cardboard and it's waterproof. It's fantastic for protecting the floor from this sort of thing. So brush and clean up. Walls prepared, walls wetted. Now it's time for the first coat. This is what's called the scratch coat. It's 3:1 sharp sand lime putty with fibre in it. We'll lay this on this fairly thick coat, up to 5 to 7 millimeters. This is not designed to be perfectly smooth, just to take the worst of it out and to give you a good base, and the fibre helps hold everything together. After this, we've got a second coat and then 2 top finish coats. So the second coat we're looking for smooth, the top coats we're looking for fine. So this is just the base. So let's crack on. Lime plasters a 3-coat system. We've already got the scratch coat on. We're now going to put the second coat on. The second coat's a very similar mix, 3:1 sharp and putty. I've got a little bit of hair in it because it's what was left from this mix that I kept over last week. But the main difference is the finish. Whereas before when we finished the scratch coat, we scratched it. The second coat will trowel off with a wooden trowel, and then when it's slightly hard, we'll trowel it over with the devil trowel, which will still give key, but nowhere near as much. So we're looking for a much smoother finish now. After this will come the 2 finish coats, which are much thinner and a different mix. So we're nearly there. The next step, now we've got this on and it's just starting to harden up a little bit, is to devil float. This is effectively a wooden float with 4 screws in it that just protrude a little bit, and it enables us just to scratch up the surface just a little bit. Helps consolidate and give the next coat somewhere to stick. So we've done our dubbing out, our scratch coat, and then our float coat. Float coat's gone on for about a week. We started wetting down yesterday, wetted down again a couple of times today. Now it's time to get the first of 2 finished coats on. So far the mixes have been fairly similar. This time we're using a much finer sand and we're using a higher percentage of lime putty, about 2 to 1, maybe a bit more, as opposed to the 3 to 1 we used before. This will go on 1 coat today and struck off with a steel trowel to try and get a good finish. We won't necessarily achieve it, but that's where we're aiming for. And then the second coat tomorrow to finish it off again, and that will be the finished coat. So let's get some muck on the walls. So that's the first top coat set up. It's fairly hard, so that will take the next coat. The next coat is the same mix, just slightly thinner. Again, we'll work this with a hard trowel once it's set off to give us a smooth finish. So there we have it, the top final coat, and that's this project all finished, bar fitting the dado rail and painting it. Next is on to the floors. So please, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe, and watch out for the next video on the floors.